Dear friends, Jesus often answered people's questions with one of his own questions. But in today's gospel, he answered the Pharisees immediately, combining two commandments into one. Jesus took two separate commandments from the Old Testament, from Deuteronomy and Leviticus, and presented them as the essence of true religion. Jesus told, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind." Then he added, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." According to many ancient philosophers, heart is considered to be the center of feelings or emotion. The soul is the center of energy and the principle of life. And the mind is the source or center of perception. This means we must place God first in our life, in all the areas of a whole person. This means we also must walk with Him in faith wholeheartedly. Also, the nature of the love is to be shared. It is not to be kept to oneself for selfish reasons. Today, Jesus talks about the kind of love we must have for God and for one another. According to some scripture scholars, when Jesus says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart," Jesus implies there are different levels or various forms of love. The first level of love is the minimal level, which means mutual sharing and fidelity, especially between the spouses. The next level is called logic of love. At this level, the lover is not satisfied with the bare minimum, but wants to do more to please or surprise the beloved. And the final one is called the folly of love. At this level, the lover does things that others might consider to be foolish or even madness. Let me share with you a true story of this kind of love. Dr. Ed Tennant and his wife June from Sterling in Colorado were married for a few years, but they did not have any children. When they tried to adopt a child, they could not find any healthy children. Finally, with the help of an adoption agency, they found a child that was crippled and couldn't even walk. But they went ahead with this adoption. And their experience with this child inspired them to adopt more children. And the children they adopted were considered to be unplaceable by the adoption agency. Now, Dr. Ed and his wife June have 12 such children at their home. To some people, this might look strange, because what Dr. Ed and his wife June did is sheer foolishness or madness. But to them, it was the expression of their love and a response to Jesus' invitation to love with all their heart. The most perfect example of this form of love is Jesus himself. In the eyes of God, that is the most perfect form of love we all can imitate. It may not make much sense to many people to sacrifice one's own life for others as Jesus did. But speaking about this highest form of love, the Lord tells in John chapter 15, verse 13, "No one has greater love than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends." Yes, dear friends, now as followers of Christ, we are called to love at the highest form of love. We are called to love in a way that will make the non-loving people to think that we are foolish or crazy, just like Dr. Ed and his wife seemed to others when they tried to adopt these 12 disabled children. It is this kind of love that is capable of transforming others, not only those we love, but ourselves and the world around us. One of the famous Bible scholars, Reginald Fuller, said this once: "Without the love of neighbor, the love of God remains a barren or empty emotion. And without the love of God, our love for neighbor is a refined form of self-love." So, love of God and love of our neighbor are the two sides of Christian life, and we need them both for a meaningful, spiritually fulfilling life. Moreover, we must always remember that the love of God gives us God's grace, and the love of neighbor gives us a mission in life. I like to end with a quote from Mother Teresa, who was a personification of these two kinds of love of God and love of our neighbor. She said about the compassionate love we must have for others: "Never worry about numbers. Help one person at a time and start with the person nearest to you." Let me repeat that. Never worry about numbers. Help one person at a time and start with the person nearest to you. Now let us watch a short video about how we can put these commandments into practice.
Children bear the image of their parents both physically and psychologically and spiritually. So in all those ways, they are representative, if you want, of their parents. So in a similar way, all of us, children of God, represent God. We bear the likeness of God. So every human being, all have a purpose, a mission. They're part of God's plan.
At the root of our dignity is this right to life. And the right to life extends from conception to natural death. It applies to us across the whole of our existence. And so to have an ethic of life means at all times the church is concerned for how people are doing at any given moment.
When we see people trying to justify treating other people in a certain way because they're so small, they're not born yet, they're not self-aware yet, their skin is another color, they're so disabled. Whenever we see people being spoken of more like objects, then we know that the principle of the radical equality of every human person is being violated.
The human race is a family. We're all children of God. And so we should learn that lesson from individual families, that there's no one who's expendable. Everyone is worthy of reverence and protection, but especially the weakest among us.
Our dignity also cries out for the freedom and the opportunity to become everything God intended us to be. So part of life, part of fulfilling life, part of serving life, is actually creating the opportunities for everyone to have the fullness of life.
I think Catholic social teaching urges us to operate at both the kind of individual and the global levels. Both the individual who's in immediate need, so think of the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. At the same time, we have to be attentive to the more global, the more societal violations of justice. There is systemic violence, there is systemic injustice. That has to be addressed too.
So it's not just the lawmakers, but national institutions, corporations, have this obligation to affirm the principle of the right to life and dignity, and then to decide how their institution can go about realizing it. On a personal level, it requires figuring out how you, and often this is the most effective level, at the one-on-one level, at the small group level, can make a difference, and in realizing those parts of human dignity that are in short supply, and that you have the wherewithal to do something about.
All of the church's social teaching, its understanding of family, of community life, of justice, of good governance, all of this comes back to the question, what will fulfill life for every human being as God has intended it?